Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC Tampa, which goes down this weekend, and we're also closing out 2024 from the breakdown podcast perspective as well. It's mental that UFC Tampa is the final UFC event of the year. It's just flown by. I cannot believe that we're closing out another year of the UFC. Obviously, it'll be shut down after MMA and the UFC will be shut down after this event, and then it'll reopen mid-January as always. You'll usually get a rising card at the end of the year, at the end of December, but from a UFC perspective, this weekend will be the last event until mid-January. So, like I said, it's absolutely crazy that we've just seen out another full year. And yeah, look, I always enjoy the breaks. You know, we work hard all year, so I enjoy this break between Christmas and New Year, or at least enjoy it for a week and then really start missing it. So yeah, look, it's the final breakdown podcast of the year. It's the final UFC event of the year. It's a really good card as well. Even though it's a fight night, I actually really like this card, and I think the fights are going to be great. And yeah, like I say, that's what we've got coming up in the breakdown podcast. Just before I get into the breakdowns though, as always, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend one last time in 2024, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for absolutely every type of gambler. If you're a fun gambler that likes the long shot parlays, or maybe you even want us to create the parlays for you, maybe you want to create your own parlays, we've got all that in the Fun Gamblers section. We've also got full written breakdowns as well for the recommended bets, the best potential bets on the entire card, and then we've got an official bet section, which is exactly where my money goes as the MMA Play 365 professional handicapper. And then of course, all subscriptions come with Base AI, our UFC prediction software that gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every fight of every UFC event. So that's win-loss, that's method of victory, knockout, submission, decision on either side of the fight. And we've also got methods of victory plus rounds, so knockout round 1, 2 and 3, submission round 1, 2 and 3, and of course rounds 4 and 5 for championship fights, main events and featured co-main events as well. And just wrapping this up, the best part of it all is our subscriptions are super affordable, as well as our ethos here at MMA Play 365 is that we do not want you to spend too much money on the subscription, because we want you to make that subscription money back as soon as possible so you can start profiting on your bets as soon as possible as well. So that's all at MMAplay365.com. So with the introduction out the way, with the promotion out the way, let's get into breaking some fights. And as always, we start in the main event. And we've got a really interesting main event here. We've got Colby Covington versus Joaquin Buckley. Now, this is interesting for so many different reasons. I mean, first of all, from Colby Covington's perspective, and this is, by the way, no disrespect to Joaquin Buckley, and I'll explain what I mean, but this is the biggest step down in competition that Colby Covington has fought in so many years. Like, Covington's been at the top of the division for a long time. He's been fighting the best fighters in the world for such a long time, championship fights. And like I say, that's not any disrespect to Buckley, that's just facts. You know, Joaquin Buckley right now isn't a prime version of Kamaru Usman. He's not the champion version of Leon Edwards either. And in fact, Colby Covington, he's only lost 4 times as a professional fighter, and those 4 losses have come once against Leon Edwards as a champion, and 2 times against Kamaru Usman, and then the Warlley Alvarez fight that was very early in his UFC career. You know, he just got caught with the guillotine, and those types of fights happen. So outside of the, you know, the long shot Warlley Alvarez finish in that fight, like, Colby Covington has only lost against Usman and Leon Edwards, who, like I say, at the time, Leon Edwards was the champion, and of course Usman both times was the champion there as well. So again, from Joaquin Buckley's perspective, it's interesting because Joaquin Buckley absolutely, like I say, isn't a championship version of Leon Edwards, and he's not a prime version of Kamaru Usman, but he is a fighter that's rising, that's coming up. He's on a heater. He's looking so developed over the years in the since we first saw him in the UFC. Like, he's dropped down a weight class, he's physically strong, he's quick, he's athletic, he's got power, his wrestling, at least from, you know, an offensive perspective, has really come on a little bit as well. So Buckley's a fighter that, in my opinion, is very deserving of this spot against Colby Covington. It's just a very interesting spot because, look, last time out, Colby Covington against Leon Edwards, like, Covington looked absolutely, like, just shocking. Maybe not shocking as in, like, terrible and his skill set had disappeared, but shocking as in, like, the way he fought. Like, it took him 3.5 rounds to start to get going, and then when he did get going, he actually looked like he had something for Leon Edwards. And you think, well, if he started to fight like that in round 1, then, you know, he probably would have won that fight and become a champion, but he didn't. It was a very subdued performance. It was something that we'd not really seen from Covington before. And then now we're asking the questions of, well, is Colby Covington over the hill? Well, I don't know yet. I'm not committing to Colby Covington is done and his decline just yet. I think this fight's going to tell us that. The issue is, it just, like I say, we just hadn't seen that type of performance from Covington where it was so underwhelming. Like, even in the fights where Covington's grinding and shooting takedown after takedown, at least you can sit back and appreciate the pace and pressure that he's putting on. A bit like a Merab Dvalishvili, you know, you can appreciate the cardio, the pace, the takedown attempts, and the utter domination, even if there's not a great deal happening in the fight in regards to action and big strikes. But in that Leon Edwards fight, Colby didn't really do anything at all, and it was just really strange. But the thing is, within sports, as a professional athlete, is every professional athlete, regardless of whatever sport they're competing in, is going to have a bad night, a bad game, a bad fight, whatever it is associated with that sport. So you could chalk that down for Colby not being in the cage, you know, very frequently, and then he's having a title fight against Leon Edwards, who, to be fair to Leon Edwards, is super well-rounded everywhere. So it's not as if he's got that specific weakness in the wrestling defense, for example, where Colby could exploit him. You know, like I say, Leon Edwards is super well-rounded, and then from a striking perspective, Edwards was just getting off on some good strikes. So maybe Covington, you know, was expecting something different. Maybe he got in the cage and was struggling to make the reads early, couldn't get in, and then suddenly is getting pieced up a little bit on the striking, and things just aren't going his way. Like, I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm trying to find a potential reason for why Colby fought in the way he fought, especially early on, because, like I said, late on, when he started hitting takedowns, you could clearly see that he was the better wrestler. So something happened, something went on, and until I see that for a second time, I'm not going to be convinced that Colby Covington is over the hill just yet. Now, he's definitely got his hands full with Buckley, because Buckley is very aggressive. He'll come forwards. I'm telling you now, Buckley's going to try and take Colby's head off very early and be very aggressive and try and push Colby backwards. The thing is, and this is the big thing, if Colby has got anything like his old self still left in him, he is going to beat Joaquin Buckley in this fight. Like, if Colby has still got that insane pressure, wrestling, cardio style of fighting, eventually, as long as he's not knocked out within the first couple of minutes in this fight, he's going to get at Buckley, he's going to shoot takedown after takedown, he's going to wear him down, he's going to have the better gas tank for 5 rounds. I'm actually quite surprised that the betting market has ultimately made their decision of if Colby Covington is over the hill or not. And that decision, according to the betting line, is that he is, and that Buckley is going to absolutely run through him. But I'm just not convinced. And again, you know, this might be a very unpopular opinion, but I just think that even if Colby has got 75% of what he had in his prime still left in him, he beats Joaquin Buckley quite comfortably over 5 rounds. I think the only way that Colby Covington loses this fight definitively is if that Leon Edwards fight wasn't an anomaly, if it wasn't a one-off, if Colby is actually over that hill. Because if he is, and he's very tentative and he doesn't push forwards and he doesn't shoot takedowns here, Buckley, I think, will steamroll him. But like I say, that's if Colby is, you know, sort of a shadow of his previous self. And I'm just, like I say, until I see it for a second time, I'm not convinced. So for those reasons, I'm picking Colby Covington to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Cub Swanson versus Billy Quarantillo. And this is an interesting fight because initially, as soon as I saw Billy Quarantillo against Cub Swanson, I saw the line of around -150. I'm like, yeah, look, Quarantillo's definitely the bet here. But the thing is, like, I feel like I need to, I don't know whether it's me giving Cub Swanson the respect that I didn't give him last time out. Because look, I bet Andre Fili quite heavily when they last fought. And it was one of those super close split decisions that, to be honest with you, I kind of did score it to Cub Swanson, but I was also, very understanding that the fight was super close and it could have gone either way. But the point is, I think Andre Fili was like a minus 250 favourite, so Cub Swanson was absolutely the right side to bet, even though he lost the split decision. So it wasn't a good bet from me, even though I cashed it on Andre Fili. But, I didn't pay Cub Swanson too much respect in that specific fight because, the dude is aging, he's towards the end of his career, he's been in so many wars, he's took so much damage, he's got a lot of miles on the clock. And, I was thinking, well, Andre Fili, yeah, he's not some young, hungry stud, but he's still kind of in his prime. He's still very active. He's still quick and mobile and athletic. And I thought he would be able to really run through Swanson, but he didn't. It was a tough fight. Now with Billy Quarantillo, Quarantillo doesn't have the miles on the clock that Swanson has. He's been in a few wars, but again, not as many as Swanson's got. But even when you look at the age of Quarantillo, he's 36 himself. He's again heading towards the latter stages of his career. So it's not as if, like I say, Billy Quarantillo is this, like I said with Fili, it's not as if Quarantillo's this young, hungry, up-and-coming guy that's going to absolutely steamroll Swanson. So, yeah, look, once I started to look into the fight, I was a bit like, well, you look at the wins that Quarantillo's had, he's not beaten anybody like Cub Swanson. Yeah, he's fought some good fighters like Edson Barboza, for example, as one example, but he didn't win that fight. He got knocked out early in the fight. So it's not as if he's fighting the guys around Swanson's, ability and capabilities of where he's been at all his career and beating him. He's had a couple of fights against those big guys, but then, he tends to lose. And then you look at the Damon Jackson fight, I love Damon Jackson. I bet on Damon Jackson pretty much every fight. His style's good. But the one thing that I have noticed on the last two times I've bet Damon Jackson is I've realised it's probably going to be the last two times I bet Damon Jackson, because he's clearly a fighter that is, that is on that decline. It's obvious now, and he's not the fighter he used to be. So again, going back to Billy Quarantillo, when Quarantillo fought Damon Jackson, yes, he won, but there was that one moment in the third round where Damon Jackson was winning, but then Quarantillo managed to turn it around, steal the third round, and therefore steal the fight. So again, it's Quarantillo's operating, in my opinion, on the same level as where Swanson is right now, towards the end of his career, aging a little bit, not picking up wins against top competition. And for that reason, this fight's matched quite well. And I'll be honest, I've been flip-flopping between them both, because on one side, I still don't fully trust Cub Swanson. I still think he's more declined as a fighter than Quarantillo. It's just, I think Cub Swanson is the more skilled fighter out of the two. So it's, like I say, that's why I've been flip-flopping. It's which way do you go? It's tough. It is really tough. I think, though, that, look, if this is the Cub Swanson against Billy Quarantillo, if it's the same Cub Swanson, the same performances we got against Andre Fili, then I think Cub Swanson beats him. It's just, like I say, at this stage of Cub Swanson's career, it's kind of hard to trust because of where he's at, and he's probably going to have performances that are really good, and then they drop a little bit, and then they come back. That's just, the fighters struggle to have that consistency at the end of the career, to be the same fighter every single time out. And again, that's the kind of concern that I've got with Swanson. But like I say, if this is the Cub Swanson that we had against Andre Fili, I think he beats Billy Quarantillo. And usually when I'm flip-flopping between who wins from a prediction perspective, I'll naturally just go with whoever's the underdog, which in this case is Cub Swanson. So for those reasons, I'm picking Cub Swanson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Manel Kape versus Bruno Silva. Now, again, this was, I had sort of a pre-lean before I looked into the fight. And then when I looked into the fight, I've switched to the other side. It seems to be a bit of a running theme for this final UFC event of 2024. But look, when I first saw the fight matched up, I thought this is going to be really interesting. The betting lines should be quite close. Then when I saw the betting lines and I saw Manel Kape, I wouldn't say he's a huge favourite. Like I don't think he's out at like minus 300. I think it's like the minus 250 range. But I thought, well, that's still quite wide. You know, I might take this shot on Bruno Silva. So I started to look into the fight, and yeah, look, I'm not sold on Bruno Silva in this fight as I was before I started looking into it. And the reason being is, look, from the path to victory of Bruno Silva's perspective, the dude hits like a truck, like ask Cody Durden. Like Cody Durden felt that in a fight where Cody Durden was absolutely dominating him, by the way, like had him in all kinds of trouble for like a round and a half, and then Silva just found that one punch that was the beginning of the end for Cody Durden. But Bruno Silva doesn't have bad wrestling either. He's a guy that I'm sure he took Tagir Ulanbekov down like 4 or 5 times in their fight. And his jiu-jitsu was really slick as well. So he's a really good all-round type of fighter. So that's why I was quite interested in him versus Kape. But the issue with this fight against Kape is, look, I've never been massively high on Kape as a fighter at the highest level in this division in the UFC. But at this level against a Bruno Silva, I absolutely think this is the level where he will be able to be comfortably winning fights regularly. Now, again, with Bruno Silva, where Bruno Silva needs to take this fight to win, I think he needs to take Manel Kape down. Now, if this was Manel Kape of 2 or 3 years ago, I'd be more confident in Silva, but over the years, Manel Kape's takedown defense has got a lot better. I know that Mokaev got him down a couple of times, but if you go back and watch that fight, and bear in mind, I had a big bet on Mokaev in that fight as well. Like, Mokaev didn't have it easy trying to wrestle Manel Kape. Manel Kape, you can clearly see that his takedown defense has got better. His get-up game is also pretty good as well. His scrambling's good. That side of Manel Kape's game has gotten really good defensively. So I don't think Bruno Silva's going to be able to get Manel Kape down at least very easily. And if he does and Kape scrambles straight away, he should be able to get back up to his feet. And then on the feet striking, like I say, Bruno Silva's got power, but man, Manel Kape's got a solid chin on him. I don't think it's going to be one of these cases where Silva lands something and sparks Kape. But on the flip side, from a technical perspective, Manel Kape's striking is going to be light years ahead of Bruno Silva. So I think it's going to be one of these fights that I think could be quite low volume, which is very common for a Manel Kape fight. I think Manel Kape's going to just be the much better technical striker. I think he's going to pick Bruno Silva apart. I think the pace and the range is going to be dictated by Kape, which are the key points as well. I think Kape will be in and out of range, striking, landing, moving around. And again, if it's a low volume fight, it's going to be easier for the judges to see what's happening, and I think Kape's just it's gonna be one of them fights that, like I say, I don't see there being too much action unless Kape does land on Silva and knock him out. I think that it's going to be quite low volume, but a very clear winner of each round. Again, should it go 3 rounds, which will be on Kape's side, but again, from a finishing perspective, if there is a finish, because I think the fight is more than likely won and lost on the feet, then I think that favours Kape, which means that from a finishing perspective, when it's a knockout, I think that the knockout is more likely on Kape's side as well. So, like I say, it wouldn't be a total shock for Bruno Silva, in my opinion, to beat Kape, but it's going to have to be a very, very close to perfect performance from Bruno Silva to beat Kape, and for that reason, I kind of think it's low percentage. So, for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Manel Kape to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Dustin Jacoby versus Vitor Petrino. And it's an interesting fight because of where both fighters are at. Like, you look at Dustin Jacoby, he's lost 4 out of his last 5. The only win coming against Kennedy and Zechekwu right in the middle of that 5. So he lost 2, beat Kennedy, then lost 2 again. Now, the fights that he's losing aren't against bad fighters. But the issue is Kennedy and Zechekwu is probably the best win that he's had in the UFC. And it's just not, like Dustin Jacoby is a fighter that I've had praise for before. Like, I like Jacoby, I like his style, and he comes to fight. And I think that he gives something in this division that he's just a little bit different in regards to how technical he is as a striker. But when your best win in the UFC is Kennedy Nzechukwu, and again, I don't mean any disrespect to Nzechukwu there, I just mean that, look, Jacoby doesn't have a win against someone in the top 15 or the top 20, so when your best win is a fighter, shall we say, that's not in the top 15, not in the top 20, and not regarded as a fighter that is probably going to climb into those ranking positions, even though Nzechukwu changed weight, I just don't think it's a great look. And then on the flip side, you've got Vitor Petrino, who was an absolutely huge favourite against Anthony Smith in his last fight and got guillotined in round 1 and lost. Now, I do kind of feel that all fighters that are rising, that are legitimate prospects, they do always take that first strange loss, that not strange, but a loss that they shouldn't have probably taken. And you look at Anthony Smith, like, no disrespect here, but that's a loss that's aged horrifically considering what happened last time out. But like I say, these fighters that do have something about them, that are rising, that we are potentially talking about in the top 15, they do tend to take that one, like I say, anomaly loss. Look at Colby Covington. I mentioned it earlier on in this specific podcast. He got guillotined by Wally Alves himself years ago. You know, that had no effect of where Colby Covington went, his trajectory, and how good of a career that he's had. So I think that maybe we can give Vitor Petrino a little bit of a pass for that, but you're looking at the betting line. Vitor Petrino is a minus 300 favourite again here. So, you know, it does give you some hesitancy when it comes to potentially playing Vitor Petrino, whether it's straight or in a parlay, just because of what happened last time out. Are we going to see, you know, a similar thing here? Obviously, it's more than likely not going to be the guillotine. Is it going to be Dustin Jacoby knocking Petrino out? Well, the thing is, like I say, there's a big difference in regards to the experience level between an Anthony Smith and Dustin Jacoby. So look, if Dustin Jacoby and Anthony Smith fought now, I would heavily favour Dustin Jacoby to win. But the thing is, you can't take away, like I say, the veteran quality and experience that Anthony Smith had in that fight with Petrino, and that showed out. Whereas here, I think that Petrino's fighting somebody more on his level when it comes to experience. Of course, Jacoby is more experienced, but I think the more level is where they are in the career as athletes. And like I say, look, Jacoby's striking's good and it's technical, and I think he's going to be the better technical striker against Petrino. But where Petrino causes fighters problems that maybe are a better striker than him is the aggression, the forward pressure, the power that he throws in his strikes. And the thing is, with Jacoby, he can be got at. He has been knocked out a couple of times. He's been dropped on quite a few occasions as well. So he can be got at by fighters that are aggressive, in your face, that will be looking to take 2-3 step forwards at all times. And that does very much describe Vitor Petrino. So where Petrino might not be the better technical striker, I think he's going to be the one coming forwards. And I think he's going to be the one more dangerous, more live for a finish as well, because he's landing the big hard shots. And we've seen Jacoby on the back foot and be got at numerous times before. Where Petrino, though, has got a different aspect of his game here is that he could at any time just stop those big bombs as Jacoby's moving backwards, level change and take Jacoby down, where I think Petrino's going to be the better wrestler in this fight, especially because I imagine that he's going to be the one moving forwards, Jacoby's going to be the one moving backwards, which again is going to make the wrestling a little bit easier. But if Petrino gets on top of Jacoby, I think Jacoby's going to have issues getting him off. If he gets settled, like maybe in an initial scramble, or Jacoby can quickly get his back against the cage and wall walk back up to his feet, you know, that's probably going to be Jacoby's best chance. But if Petrino settles on top of Jacoby and gets both his shoulders on the mat, I think it's going to be tough for Jacoby to get back up, because then he's going to be dealing with ground and pound as well. So, like I say, the line's a little bit sketchy, especially considering that Petrino, like I say, has just come off a first round finish loss against a fighter that he probably should have been beaten, even though he was more experienced. And Petrino was around the same price there as what he is here, but it's a different level of opponent in regards to level of competition face and experience. And again, I do think it kind of maybe was a bit of an anomaly loss for Petrino last time out. I expect a different version of him. Whether he covers the minus 300, I still think it's possible. Like I say, it's just a little bit sketchy because of what happened last time out. But Like I've already said a few times already, I think Petrino's aggression and forward pressure here with his power striking could get at Jacoby. And then there's that second path to victory as well with the wrestling and the topside grappling. So for those reasons, I'm picking Vitor Petrino to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a banger, and this is a fight that I was back and forth a little bit as well, and I have come to a more solidified decision, but we've got Daniel Marcos versus Adrian Yanez. So Daniel Marcos is a fighter that I bet numerous times in the UFC. The only one that I didn't bet him was his UFC debut, which I kind of regretted in hindsight because I did like the plus money, but I was a little bit unsure on him at that level, and he was in Brazil against a Brazilian. So, you know, in all fairness to me, there was some things that kind of did put me off, but since then I've been all in on Daniel Marcos. Like, I bet him so many times, even as like a sort of moderate to large favourite. I've been betting on him because I think the quality that we get with Daniel Marcos is just unbelievable. He's absolutely one of the rising stars in this division in the UFC. And the thing is with Adrian Yanez, like, Yanez is a good fighter himself. I think his prospect status has taken a massive hit over the last couple of fights. I don't think anybody is looking at him now the same way as they did before he took that loss against Rob Font. I think that would have been the fight that everyone was like, okay, Yanez is for real, you know, if he beat Rob Font, but he didn't. And then obviously he lost to Jonathan Martinez. And yeah, look, I don't think that Yanez is... Yanez, at one point, people were talking about him like, you know, I'm talking about Daniel Marcos, but he's kind of lost a little bit. But I'm not taking anything away from Yanez as a fighter because he's still super dangerous. He's still a slick boxer. And I think if he can get into the pocket here against Daniel Marcos and get into the boxing exchanges, I think he's going to be a real problem for Marcos to deal with in that range. The issue is, I'm just not sure if he gets into that range very often. Like, Daniel Marcos is just ability to recognize danger and dictate the pace and the range of the fight is just special to watch. Like, I don't see Marcos getting into a brawl here with Yanez, and I kind of feel that Yanez needs that style, like the Cody Garbrandt style, you know, getting in and out of range, landing when he wants to land, and then in boxing range, landing combinations. Marcos just will not let that happen. Like, he moves well laterally, moves well backwards as well as forwards as well. He's got good low kicks, which we've seen Yanez's legs taken out by Jonathan Martinez as well. But then when Marcos is the one dictating the pace of the fight, he can choose when he decides to go in regards to his striking. So he can come into range, he'll land, and then he'll get straight back out of there. If he doesn't give Yanez the fight that Yanez wants and needs, I think it's going to be a tough fight for Yanez, because I just don't think that Yanez finds Marcos as much as what he needs to or what he wants to in this fight. That might then start setting in a little bit of frustration. Yanez might start taking chances. And don't sleep on Marcos' power either. Like, Marcos, when he sits down, he's got good strikes, he's got good power. You know, he's floored numerous guys in the UFC, and he doesn't look like that big hitter, but it's the timing and the accuracy of Marcos that sits these guys down. So yeah, like I say, initially when before I looked into this fight, I thought this is an absolute banger, and it is a banger, but I thought it was a banger into the point where, okay, it's probably going to be a 50-50 fight. I'm not really sure which side I'm going to be on, but looking into the fight, I think Marcos's defensive abilities, movement, like I say, laterally and backwards is going to help him here as well, especially when Yanez is being aggressive. But Yanez can slow down as well, and Marcos can pick things up later in fights. So, you know, the more I looked into it, the more I liked Marcos. I'm picking Daniel Marcos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got newcomer Navajo Stirling versus Tuco Tokkos. Now, with Stirling, like I say, he's the newcomer. He comes out the city kickboxing gym with likes of Israel Adesanya, with Dan Hooker, Carlos Ulberg, all those guys. And he actually kind of reminds me of a very newer version of Carlos Ulberg. Like, he comes from a striking background. You can see he's tall, he's long, he's got power. He's very technical with his kickboxing. And yeah, like I say, he looks like a much newer version of a Carlos Ulberg. And it's going to be really interesting to see him grow in the UFC. Now, the issue that I've got for Stirling is, right now, at the minute, he's still kind of a little green. I still think this is going to be a big step up in competition for him coming into the UFC. Maybe not this specific fight, but with the level of the fighters that are going to be around him now in the UFC, I think that Stirling's got some developing to do. But I think that the developments will happen. I think they'll happen quite rapidly as well. And I think from a UFC's perspective, they should be looking at Stirling as maybe a fighter that they want to build up in the coming years. So with that in play, it's really important that they get him the right fights at the right time. And I kind of feel that this is where we're at with Tuco Tokkos, because Tokkos is not a fighter that I'm massively high on, if I'm being honest. I think he's okay. He's serviceable at a certain level in the UFC, but I think that this is going to be one of those fights that the UFC are like, okay, Stirling, welcome to the UFC. Let's take this journey slow. Let's start with a Tuco Tokkos that is going to be a dog fighter in there that is going to come at you, but a fighter that allows you to have the best performance possible. And I think that's really key, because looking at the two styles, I think the way Tuco Tokkos fights is going to bring the best out of Navajo Stirling. I don't think Stirling's going to be too much over his head in this fight. I think it's a really good first fight for Stirling to get his feet wet in the UFC, get the UFC debut jitters out the way, maybe get a couple of rounds in there as well. Like, I'm not sure if Stirling wants to come out and get him out of there in round one, but I think that's a possibility, but I also think it would benefit Stirling to just slow down a little bit, be a little bit patient in round one, feel your way into the UFC, get your strikes going, start to pick Tokkos apart a little bit, and then ramp it up in round two and get him out of there. But like I say, also wouldn't shock me to see Stirling come out here aggressive, hyped up, and just put something on Tokkos and get him out of there in round one either. I just think, like I say, no disrespect to Tokkos. He's a dog. He'll be in the fight as much as he can be. He'll take strikes to give strikes. He's that type of fighter that's not just going to sit back and be actionless. He'll try and bring something to absolutely every single fight at this level. I just think stylistically it's a good first fight for Stirling in the UFC. So for those reasons, I'm picking Navajo Stirling to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Michael Johnson versus Ottman Azaitar. And it's a bit of an odd fight, this, because Michael Johnson, again, he's a fighter that's, I've said this a few times on this card already, that's definitely closer to the end of his career than he is to the beginning of his career. He's got so many miles on the clock. He's been in wars. He's been knocked out numerous times. So he's definitely a fighter that is, like I say, closer to the end of his career, but he's still serviceable at a certain level in the UFC. And that certain level is fighters outside of the top 15, outside of the top 20. I think once you're looking at Johnson versus ranked fighters, that's when he starts having a few issues. But fighters outside of that, I think that Johnson, this version of Johnson, will be beaten. And I'd put Azaitar in that category. And you look at Azaitar, like, once upon a time, I was actually quite high on Azaitar. Really liked him. Bet him as an underdog against Karma Worthy. That cashed round one, knockout. And I thought, this Azaitar's actually got a little bit of something about him. He looked really good in Brave. He'd gone numerous rounds with some really good opponents, and you could see he had a little bit of a wrestling and grappling game, both offensively and defensively. And then he had this power in his hands, and he was super aggressive. I quite liked what I saw from Azaitar. But then he goes out and gets knocked out in round one against Matt Frivola, which is, it's not the worst loss, but you just don't want to be getting knocked out in round one. And then in the next fight after that, gets knocked out in round one again, this time by Francisco Prado. I actually think that Prado's a decent fighter, but again, if Azaitar is going to be that fighter that makes that next level up, a fighter that's beating someone like Michael Johnson, you need to be beating somebody like Francisco Prado. So in this fight, Azaitar's coming off 2 back-to-back round one knockout losses, and you think, okay, well, if those are a little bit of anomaly losses, or maybe he's just got caught in a couple of fights, which can happen, let's have a look at his UFC wins. So his only UFC wins is the Karma Worthy win, which Karma Worthy turned out to be not that great, no longer with the UFC, he was old as well. And then the other loss was Teemu Packalén, which I've not heard of Teemu Packalén for I don't even know how many years. So yeah, it comes to a point, was I wrong about Azaitar? But even if there is something about Azaitar, maybe I'm wrong for assuming I was maybe wrong, but I think this version of Michael Johnson, I think, beats someone like Azaitar. Johnson, even though he's always at risk of getting chin-checked and knocked out, which Azaitar could absolutely do, from a skill set perspective, Johnson's light years ahead of him. From a technical perspective, that's the striking, the wrestling, and the grappling, both offensively and defensively. He's fought the better level of competition. He's much more experienced. The speed, even though Johnson's, again, towards the end of his career rather than the start, like I've already said, the speed of Johnson's strikes is still absolutely insane. Like, fighters struggle to deal with it. So, yeah, I'm on the side of Johnson. It wouldn't surprise me if Ottman Azaitar did, pack a bomb up and land it on his chin and knock him out. But outside of that, I think it's a good fight for Johnson to style again here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Michael Johnson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a potential banger here, actually. We've got Drakkar Klose versus Joel Alvarez. Now, I like Alvarez a lot, especially in this fight as well. The only pause that it gives me is Drakkar Klose is sometimes really horrible to back against, just because I think he's a lot better and performs a lot better than what a lot of people give him credit for. Like, the dude's on a 4-fight win streak, and a couple of those fights have been good fights, good opponents. Like, you've got a Rafa Garcia in there, you've got a Joaquin Silva in there. So Drakkar Klose is still performing at this level. It's just when you look at Joel Alvarez, he's always going to have a size advantage over his opponents. Like, I'm not sure how he even makes the weight. He's massive. Like, he's tall and he's long, but not only is he tall and he's long, like, he's thick built as well. Like, it's a bit of an anomaly, actually, how he even makes weight. It's a bit of a mystery, sorry, not an anomaly. How he makes weight, because he's so big. And he carries the power with him, and he carries cardio with him as well, even when he's wrestling and grappling. So, yeah, he's a real athlete, is Joel Alvarez. Now, again, when you look at Joel Alvarez, he's only lost 2 fights in the UFC. Those losses was his UFC debut against a primed Damir Ismagulov, who Damir Ismagulov at that point was just an absolute phenom. Like, that was a guy that a lot of people were saying would be at the top of the division, and he nearly got there and then had that strange end to his career. So that was loss number 1. His second loss, Alvarez's second loss, was Arman Tsarukyan, which Tsarukyan's about to fight for a world championship against Islam Makhachev. So that tells you the level of opponents that are beating Joel Alvarez. So, from at least from a paper perspective, Drakkar Klose is going to have to be a Damir Ismagulov or a Joel Alvarez, and he's just not. But then from a stylistic perspective, when you watch the tape, when you watch the film, like, Joel Alvarez, I think, is going to be a very aggressive striker in this fight. I think once he hits Drakkar Klose, I think Klose is going to start having a lot of respect for the power coming at him, and that's going to allow Alvarez to just really come forwards and put combinations on him. The thing is with Drakkar Klose likes mixing things up and wrestling. So if he tries to tie up with Alvarez, I think Alvarez is going to be stronger. I think the knees are going to be there, the elbows are going to be there in the clinch. But if Drakkar Klose tries taking Joel Alvarez down, that's where Joel Alvarez is just an absolute nightmare to deal with, because unless you're a very good, like, topside wrestler with good jiu-jitsu defensively, Alvarez is going to have the time of his life down there on his back. He'll be throwing up arm bars, triangles. He's got super long legs, like I've already mentioned, tall and long. And he can sweep, he can reverse, he can get back up to his feet. Like, Joel Alvarez is quite the full package when it comes to it. The only thing that I'd really like to see Alvarez do more than what he actually does is shoot takedowns, is be offensive with his wrestling, because he's got really good grappling. And we actually don't see him too much on top of his opponents. And it just makes you wonder, with how good and tricky he is off his back, actually, how good is he on top? Like, if he gets Drakkar Klose down, like, he should be absolutely elite on top with how good he is off his back. So, yeah, it's the one side of Alvarez's game that I wish we'd see more of, the offensive wrestling. But in this fight, I think Alvarez is going to be the more dangerous striker. Maybe not the more technical, but definitely the more aggressive, more dangerous, finishing upside on the feet as well. Then if Klose decides to clinch up, I like Alvarez in the clinch. If Klose tries to take Alvarez down, I think Alvarez is going to be a nightmare on his back as well. And then it just comes to the point of, look, like, it's one of them where I was going to say, well, where does Drakkar Klose win this fight? Because I don't know. Even on the feet, at all ranges, I favour Joel Alvarez, maybe apart from boxing range. But still, it's not like light years ahead where Drakkar Klose is so much better in boxing range than Alvarez. Probably just a little bit of an edge, a little bit of an advantage. But then at the same time, if Drakkar Klose gets his hand raised here, I'm not going to be overly shocked either. It's just, like I say, I just don't know where he wins this fight. It would be more of a surprise of, like, if Drakkar Klose does win, I'll be like, oh, okay, that's where he wins the fight. But pre-fight, I just don't know. Like, yeah, I like Joel Alvarez here. For those reasons, I'm picking Joel Alvarez to win this fight. And in the next fight, super interesting fight here. We've got Sean Woodson versus Fernando Padilla. Now, Sean Woodson, every single fight that he has, he's got that reach advantage. He's got the range advantage. You know, he's tall, he's long, and he's just so difficult to fight against because he's so big. Like, he's always got huge advantages from a physical perspective with that height and reach. However, Fernando Padilla, he's only 2 inches shorter. I think there's only a couple of inches in the reach as well, and then probably only a couple of inches in the leg reach also. So when there's a massive advantage with the height and the reach, I only really put too much stock in it when you start to look at like 4-inch height advantage, 5-inch height advantage. I think between 1 and 3 inches is an advantage, of course, but I just don't think it's that significant enough that you can put stock in it. And that's just my opinion. That's just sort of how I view the height and the reach advantages. Like, you look at when Sean Woodson fought Charles Jourdain, for example, he had like a 9 or 10-inch reach advantage over Jourdain. Like, that's significant. Whereas a couple of inches in height and a couple of inches in reach, I don't think it's going to be that significant. But on the flip side, Fernando Padilla, like I say, he's 6'1" in this division as well. Like, he's not small. So he normally has the height advantage and the reach advantage over his opponent. So actually, both fighters here are not going to have their usual advantages they have in the fights. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. Sean Woodson, technically, is still going to be the slightly taller, longer guy. But I just don't think it's going to play that much of a part. Like, both fighters are tall and long. They both like the straight punches. They both fight like tall men. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. Then, to make things even more sort of mirror imaged of each other, they're both predominantly strikers. They're both predominantly boxing heavy strikers as well. So it kind of makes the fight a little bit easier to analyse, in my opinion, because it's likely going to be an MMA boxing fight with a little bit of this and a little bit of that mixed into it. I'm sure people are playing that song in their head right now. But yeah, I just think that it's going to be predominantly played out on the feet, MMA boxing. So then you're looking at, well, can it play out anywhere else? What happens if they're so dead even on the feet? Which fighter is more likely to mix things up? Well, I think that's more likely to be Woodson. You know, Woodson has scored numerous takedowns in a couple of fights. So, you know, he's got a wrestling game. He can grapple as well. You know, he's been taken down so many times and got back up to his feet. So yeah, I think if you are looking at, you know, one of these fighters decides to take it in a slightly different direction to mix things up, that's more likely Woodson. So again, I kind of favour that fighter a little bit more likely to win in these types of fights where it's so dead even. But then you start to look at other elements of the fight, level of competition. How many fights have they had at this level in the UFC? And again, you're starting to get a couple more advantages on the Sean Woodson side. Woodson's definitely fought the better level of competition. He's beaten better opponents than what Fernando Padilla is himself and has fought himself. So again, Woodson's been fighting in the UFC for longer as well. He's had more fights at this level. Then, like I say, is the more likely fighter to maybe mix things up should he need to. So again, when you start to put that jigsaw together, I just start to lean a little bit more on the side of Woodson. There's some things that come to the surface that I think, okay, well, that's a small factor. Maybe edge that to Woodson. That's a small factor. I'll edge that to Woodson. That's a small factor. I'll edge that to Woodson. And it's suddenly like all these really, really small factors. Again, the height and reach, it's not significant, but slightly on the side of Woodson. I'm getting that sort of feeling where it's going to be close, it's going to be competitive, but when one fighter's just needing to make those slight significant changes in the fight or have those slightly significant moments, which fighter is it more likely to slightly be? And again, it's all coming back, it's all coming to me with Woodson. So yeah, look, I think it's going to be super close, I think it's going to be super competitive, but I think Woodson's just got all these little slight things that could add together just to make things a little bit extra clear in regards to certain rounds. You know, rounds go by, which fighters got that slight edge in that round, just to put that little bit of a stamp on that round. Again, I think it's these small aspects that are going to add up, that are going to allow Woodson to just take that one step further and make things a little bit clear, rather than one of these split decisions that you've got absolutely no way which way it's gone. So yeah, look, I think it's a really good fight. I think it's going to be interesting to see how both fighters deal with somebody as tall as each other, but I am sort of leaning towards Woodson here. I'm picking Sean Woodson to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Miles Johns versus Felipe Lima. Now, Miles Johns, listen, I was ready to load up on Cody Garbrandt against Miles Johns. I couldn't believe that Garbrandt was the underdog against him. Obviously, from a breakdown perspective, I picked Cody Garbrandt to win. I told everybody exactly why I thought that Garbrandt was live in the fight. Obviously, from an official bet perspective, that's all in the MMA Play 365 hub. So, I wouldn't have told anybody on the podcast that's where I was betting. But, man, yeah, I thought that was a really, really good fight for Garbrandt and a really solid and live underdog as well. The fight didn't materialise. And now Miles Johns got Felipe Lima. And I actually think this is... I don't know if it's a more difficult fight for Miles Johns, but... I definitely think that he's got his work cut out for him here. Like, Felipe Lima is a fighter that I really like. Look, he made his UFC debut up a weight class on short notice. He was already kind of in camp to fight Jonas Magard in Octagon for a title, so he was already preparing for a 5-round fight, but he still took a short notice fight in the UFC up a weight class against Mohamed Naimov, who, by the way, Mohamed Naimov's like a difficult fighter to beat. He's good everywhere. He's got good striking. He's a guy that did extremely well against, a Nathaniel Wood, and I think Nathaniel Wood's one of the best fighters in the division in regards to being maybe, outside top 5-10. I think Wood's a solid fighter. So I think that for him to win against for Felipe Lima to win against Naimov on his UFC debut, short notice, up a weight class, man, that was impressive. And look, I know that Felipe Lima was down on the scorecards, or at least on a couple of the scorecards. Like, he had a tough opening part of the fight, but he eventually finished Naimov, and that's what matters. He got the win. And like I say, that was a short notice debut. I actually bet Felipe Lima at plus money in that fight. I thought he was going to be a little bit cleaner than what it was, but I was happy to cash the plus money. It was a plus money underdog that won by finish, so you can't really have any complaints. And that's the issue with Lima. That's the issue for Miles Johns with Lima. Lima's so good everywhere. Like, his striking slick, offensively, defensively. He's got good wrestling. He's got good grappling. Like, I'm not sure where Johns actually gets at him. Even if Johns tries to tie up with Lima against the cage, which, Johns can have that grindy style to him where if it's not quite working technically elsewhere in the fight, he'll just use his physicality and lean on his opponents. But Felipe Lima is a fighter that I just don't think will settle with the lean. I think, he's dealt with a Mohamed Naimov up a weight class that's stronger. I think that Lima's strong himself physically, so I don't think Johns is going to have that much of a physical advantage where he can just pin Lima's back against the cage and run the clock down. Like, I think there's going to be way more to this fight than that. On the feet striking, I think Lima's the better striker. The wrestling, I think Lima's the better wrestler. If Lima wanted to take Johns down, I think he could. He'll have to set it up. Johns isn't a bad wrestler himself, but I think if Lima's landing good strikes and getting Johns moving backwards a little bit, then a level change into a double leg is going to get Johns down. And then when it comes to the grappling, I think Lima's light years ahead of Miles Johns with the jiu-jitsu. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a really tough fight for Miles Johns. I really like Lima. I think he's a fighter that could go a long way in the UFC. I'm anticipating his ceiling to be quite high. I do think he's a fighter we're going to see in the rankings within maybe 3 or 4 fights. So, yeah, I like Lima. I'm picking Felipe Lima to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Miranda Maverick versus Jamey-Lyn Horth. Now, Jamey-Lyn Horth seems to be making quite a quick turnaround here from the last fight against Ivana Petrovic. I kind of thought that Petrovic won that fight, if I'm being honest, but it was a rightful split decision. It could have gone either way. It went to the side of Horth, so there's no real complaints there. But from a betting perspective, I did bet Petrovic. I think I got her at like plus 175. And for plus 175 on a fighter that I actually did think probably did edge it, but then it was a split decision anyway. It's always the right side to bet. So, yeah, look, I'm not massively high on Jamey-Lyn Horth. I don't think that she brings, a massive, specialist skill set to the cage. I think she's one of these fighters that are pretty well-rounded and okay everywhere, but I don't think she's okay everywhere and it's a sort of ranking level in the UFC, whereas that is more of a Miranda Maverick. I could see Maverick ranked in the UFC. She does have that all-round style herself, but, I think that the bottom line here, when you're matching both of these two ladies up, I think that Miranda Maverick is just better everywhere, and then even including her physical attributes as well. So let's break it down. Like with the striking, I think Miranda Maverick's the better technical striker. I think she's got more pop on her punch as well and more volume. Then when it comes to the wrestling, I think Miranda Maverick's the better wrestler here. I think even if Jamey-Lyn Hough tries to clinch up here and look to take Miranda Maverick down, I think Maverick's wrestling, I think, is better than Hough's. Then with the jiu-jitsu, I think Maverick's absolutely the better grappler. I think that's probably the biggest gap in skill between them both in the fight. Then when you have a look at the physical attributes, I think Maverick, I don't know why I keep saying that, I think Miranda Maverick is going to be physically stronger. I think she's got good cardio. I think she's going to, if this is a clinching, grindy fight, I think Maverick's strength, her power and her cardio are all better than Hough's as well. So it's one of these fights where I actually don't think Maverick's like going to run through Hough and like completely and utterly whitewash her. But what I do think is going to happen is Hough's going to run out of ideas, because I think very quickly in this fight, might be 2 or 3 minutes, maybe it might even be a round, but I think Hough's going to end up trying a lot of things in this fight very early, because obviously all fights start standing. So I think she's going to start falling behind on the striking and think, right, okay, let's get my grind going. I clinch up with her. I think she'll try and clinch up with Maverick. I think Maverick will turn her against the cage, keep her there for maybe 30 to 60 seconds. Then Hough's going to be thinking, well, shit, now I'm not stronger. Right, let's just try and take her down. I think she's going to try and take her down. I don't think she's going to succeed. I think Maverick might even end up sprawling, getting on top of her and grappling her. And at this point, Hough's going to be like, okay, well, I've tried the striking, I've tried clinching, I've tried to wrestle her, and now she's on top of me and I can't shift her with the grappling. Where do I win this fight? And I think it's going to be one of those types of fights where Houth realises very quickly that she's outgunned. And I just don't, look, if Houth wins this fight, I'd be very surprised, because I'm just not sure where she gets the better of Maverick to win 2 out of the 3 rounds, should it go to a decision. And I don't see her finishing Maverick either. I don't think the knockout's live. And like I say, I think the biggest gap in skill is the grappling on Maverick's side. So if there's not a finish, if there is a finish, it's more likely to be Maverick with the submission. If there's no finish and it goes to decision, well, I just don't know how Houth wins 2 out of 3 rounds. So, yeah, look, for all the reasons that I've mentioned, I'm picking Miranda Maverick to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is the banger fight of the night. It's got fight of the night written all over this fight. I cannot believe it's the second fight on the entire card. Like, this is... I'd love this fight to be a 5-round featured co-main event. I'm not going to lie. We've got Davy Grant versus Ramon Taveras. Now, like I say, this is going to be an all-out banger. Like, Taveras is a fighter that is super aggressive, comes forward. His foot is always on the accelerator pedal. He'll look to land bombs. He'll look to knock his opponents down or knock them out. He's all action, and he'll throw power in all of his strikes. Now with Davy Grant on the other side, like, this dude's always down for a war. You know, he'll stand there, he'll eat 2 punches if it means landing 2 himself. He'll happily oblige in every range. If Tavares wants to fight in boxing range, then Grant will exchange boxing strikes. He'll exchange combinations inside that boxing range. Like, man, this is such a good fight. And depending on where it plays out, depends on the success that I think Grant might have in this fight. So if this is a fight that's completely and utterly played out on the feet striking, I think the fight's quite close. But I kind of think that Grant's got a potential wrestling and grappling upside here. But the thing is with Taveras, we saw in his last fight against Seri City that Taveras has got a very quick sprawl. So if Grant's going to set up the takedowns, he's going to have to do it with his hands. That's where City didn't do it. City didn't set the takedowns up with his hands. He just shot and in the open space, and then Taveras saw it and sprawled. But I think if Grant's in a little bit of a war in these exchanges, and then he suddenly just level changes or clinches with Taveras and maybe tries to trip him down to the mat, I think Grant's got a second path to victory there. Where I'm a little bit worried for Grant is if he does spend too long in these exchanges in boxing range. The one thing that does go onto Grant's side slightly here is I believe for the last time, the UFC are using their new gloves, which are now the old gloves, but the softer gloves, the ones that had the low knockout percentage rate. So I think the UFC for this event are using the softer gloves for the very last time before they full time they go back to the old gloves. So that favours Grant, because Tavara, if this was the old gloves, then I think Taveras would be more live for a knockout just because they hit harder. But I think Grant, who's got seriously good durability, can take a punch. I think he's going to be okay with these gloves. And I think Taveras is going to land and land and land and land very early. But then we see Taveras start to slow down. And I'm telling you, if he slows down against Grant and Grant's still there like halfway through the fight, Grant's going to take over. And the other thing is like the level of competition. You go back to that, like Taveras' best win in MMA is Seri City. Seri City's like 1-1 in the UFC, probably should be 0-2. Like he probably should have lost that last fight against Armfield. Whereas you've got Davy Grant, who's 1-1 against Marlon Vera. You know what I mean? He's fought and finished Jonathan Martinez. His level of competition is up there. Like even Daniel Marcos, like I spoke about Daniel Marcos earlier in this podcast, like how good he is. Davy Grant fought Marcos when Marcos was 14-0 in the UFC. A lot of people thought that was a robbery. I kind of thought that Grant won that fight. I had a bet on Marcos as well. And I thought, holy shit, like this fight's much closer than I thought it was going to be. I thought Marcos was going to style on Grant. Marcos is now 16-0. You know what I mean? So like Davy Grant, the level of competition that he's fought, like Daniel Marcos would do bad things to Ramon Taveras. So I kind of think, yeah, look, Davy Grant's live in this fight. He's fought the better level of competition. He's beaten way better fighters than Taveras is himself and has beaten himself. It's just, like I say, Taveras has got youth on his side. He's got that power shot. Can he find the light switch on Davy Grant? Well, if he doesn't, I think he's going to tire out and Grant's just going to put one of these veteran performances on him. So, yeah, for those reasons, I'm picking Davy Grant to win this fight. And finally, the final fight to break down on the final podcast of 2024, we've got Piera Rodriguez versus Josephine Knutson. And I actually think from a striking perspective, this has got all the makings to be quite a very entertaining fight as well, because both women absolutely bring it into the cage. Knutson's a natural striker herself. I think her arsenal is way more varied than Piera Rodriguez's, from the kicks, the straight punches, the kicks, mixing in elbows and knees, and a little bit more dynamic on the fight is Knutson. Whereas Piera Rodriguez on the other side, she's a good striker herself, super aggressive, always on the front foot, but she's more of a boxer. So again, when they match up striking, I think that Knutson is going to have just a little bit more success because she's going to be better at more ranges. So the ranges obviously are short, medium, long. I think within the short boxing range, I think that's Piera Rodriguez's world. But medium range, where you can land the straight punches, long range where you can, kick from the outside as well, I think that's where Knutson's going to be okay. So if Knutson's movement's good and she can dictate the pace and the range, then I think she's going to be okay. The issue is, I'm not sure she has all the pace dictation in this fight. I think that Piera Rodriguez is quite aggressive, and Piera Rodriguez will find that boxing range more often than what Knutson will want. But when it comes to looking at this fight over 3 rounds, I don't see a finish. You can never rule it out in MMA, of course. 4-ounce gloves, anybody can land that shot. But I just think that it's more likely to go 3 rounds. And when you're looking at over the course of 3 rounds, Piera Rodriguez is going to have her moments. She is going to be able to get into boxing range, but she's also going to be the one, in my opinion, working harder, which is going to take a little bit more hit on the cardio, and therefore she's probably more likely to slow down the longer the fight goes on, whereas I think Knutson will be okay for the full 3 rounds. And then, like I say, a striking arsenal is a little bit more varied. I think the striking's where the fight's won and lost, so I kind of have to be on the side of Knutson here. For those reasons, I'm picking Josephine Knutson to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. That's all for this year in 2024 as well. Sad times. We do have, maybe I haven't counted the weeks. I think it'll probably be anywhere from 3 and 5 weeks. It's definitely not 3. It'll be about 4 or 5 weeks before we get UFC again. So I'm not sure whether I'll do anything else, put anything else out on YouTube in regards to sort of like a UFC in review, fighters that I think have performed really great, that have been good from a betting perspective. I'm not sure if I'll put anything else out. If I do, then of course subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll get that notification straight away. But as for the breakdown podcasts, then that is absolutely going to be on hold now until we come back mid-January. So one last time, if you are wanting to jump into the action for one more event in 2024 with the UFC, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. Like I've already said, we've got something for every type of gambler. All you've got to do is pick the subscription length that you want, whether that's one event for $5, whether you want to pay monthly for $10, pay for a year at $99. And something we might actually do, we do most Christmases, is we might put an offer on that annual subscription over Christmas. So if you do want to get it a little bit cheaper, make sure you keep an eye on our socials and on our website as well, because there is likely going to be an offer over Christmas to get the annual for a little bit cheaper. And it's already like $99 for the year annually, which is like $8 a month, which if there's 4 UFC events within that month, that's like $2 an event. So it's already super cheap. But yeah, look, that's the point. You know, we've got the subscription packages that are super cheap, super affordable. You can get your money back quite quickly on those packages to start profiting on your own bets. And like I say, we've got something for every type of gambler, whether you're a long-term gambler, a fun gambler, whether you just want to follow my specific bets as the professional handicapper. Maybe you just like it for the AI from Bayes AI. It's all included in one package. We don't separate the subscriptions with the different products and services. Everything's all under one place and it's all super affordable. And like I say, over Christmas, we should have some offers as well. So everything MMA betting wise, make sure you check out MMAplay365.com. And for one last time, I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'll see you all back in 2025.